Hey guys, it's Anita and I make videos about fashion, travel, university and basically anything I'm passionate about. And in this video I'm talking about books I read in 2018. Alright, so I use the Goodreads app where I track everything I read, everything I want to read, and yeah, it just keeps everything really organized, and you can set reading goals as well, so I highly recommend. I actually surpassed my reading goal. I said that my goal for 2018 was to read 10 books, but by the end I read 20 books. So for this year I challenged myself to read 25 books. The first book I read in 2018 was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a winner of the Nobel Prize. So yeah, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1982. The style he uses is called magical realism. And this is also very interesting about the book. I've never read anything like this. Things happen where you're just not sure, is this supposed to be real? Like, I don't know, it's really hard to describe. 100 Years of Solitude tells the story of the rise and fall, birth and death of the mythical town of Macondo through the history of the Buendia family. Inventive, amusing, magnetic, sad and alive with unforgettable men and women, brimming with truth, compassion and a lyrical magic that strikes the soul. This novel is a masterpiece in the art of fiction. And it truly is. I mean, I need some time to get into it, really. Plus, a lot of the characters in the book have basically the same name. But there's a family tree to sort of help you. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit, I mean, actually a lot of incest going on in this family, but yeah, nothing new really. Yeah, it's just really different. It also is set in Latin America, so this was sort of a must read, and a lot of people say that this is a must read. It's a lot of lists to read. I really enjoyed it. I mean, like I said, not the easiest book to read, and I think, yeah, there's a lot of symbolism and obviously with this style of writing, but it's definitely worth it. The next book I read is much easier to read. It's Origin by Dan Brown. So the newest Dan Brown book. Like, Dan Brown is a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. What I really like about Dan Brown's work is that the stories are set in different cities and you kind of get to explore the cities throughout the book, and you know, you get fun historical facts, and also when there's art involved or architecture, it's just nice to learn something new by reading his books. It's about a scientist who figures out the origin of everything, of human beings. Some religious people think that he's a witch to religion, and there's a bit of drama involved. He gets murdered, yada yada yada. And the plot, I don't even know if it's a plot twist because it's really obvious, but yeah, I'm not going to tell you too much about it. The next book I read is The Why Are You Here Cafe by John P. Strzelecki. A new way to finding meaning in your life and your work. So I was obviously going through a quarter-life crisis when I purchased this. No, I mean, it's a quick read. It's interesting, you know, to reflect on what you really want in life, and yeah, it's nice. The next book I read is All the President's Men by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. I think this one is also a bit of a must read. It already says it on the title, the greatest reporting story of all time. This is the story that changed America, the inside account of the Watergate scandal from the two Washington Post reporters whose Pulitzer Prize winning investigation brought down the president. Published before President Nixon's resignation, All the President's Men revealed the full scope of the scandal and introduced for the first time the mysterious Deep Throat. Beginning with the story of a simple burglary at the Democratic headquarters and then continuing through headline after headline, Bernstein and Woodward deliver a riveting first-hand account of the reporting. And the thing what makes it so interesting to me is, first of all, how they investigated the scandal and really got, you know, deep into it, because at first, you know, no one really knew what was going on. And what also I think was also interesting is that President Nixon always said, like, oh yeah, this journalist, they're just lying, it's not true, yada yada yada. And that kind of reminds me of someone else. It is a bit dry to read, but it's just real life, you know. They're not going to put in some drama that didn't happen. You have to kind of get into it. So the next book I read was Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. Really a classic. It's interesting. The ending was kind of obvious, like who did it, but I still enjoyed reading it. After that I read another Agatha Christie novel, and this one's And Then There Were None. Absolutely fantastic. This one I did not see coming. I mean, when they revealed what happened, I was like, yeah, that's like, you could have thought about it, but you just don't. And I think this is just, wow, that is a really good book. And then I read Persuasion by Jane Austen. Jane Austen is one of my favorite authors. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I really like her works. I would never read a romance novel that is set in today's time, because that's really not interesting to me. About Anne Elliot, who was supposed to marry this one guy, but her family didn't approve because he wasn't rich, and so she broke off the engagement, and after 8 years they meet again. You know how it's going. So alright, then after that I read something a bit more serious. It's Can We Solve the Migration Crisis by Jacqueline Bohaba. It's also really quick read. She goes really back, I mean, why people migrate and stuff like that. It's a really good book, or should I say long essay. So it's a good read for people who want to educate themselves on migration and migration crisis. The next book I read it on my Kindle app, so it's an ebook, and it's called The Politics of Exile by Elizabeth Dauphiné. So this book is supposed to be a textbook, but it's written like a novel by this professor, and she's American, but she teaches at a Canadian university. She wrote a book about the Bosnian War, like theorizing why the war happened, and she needed someone to go through her translations, and so she meets this guy. He like goes through her translations, and he tells her that he doesn't really agree with her book, and they kind of start talking. So he kind of tells his story because he was in the war. It's basically a novel in that way. I wouldn't even thought that it was an academic like textbook, because I don't think it is, but it's priced like that, so it's really expensive for that, in my opinion. I think I mean, it was interesting, but it was a bit obvious, but maybe it's also because of my background. But yeah, and I wish it had some other perspectives. I think it's good that she acknowledges that academia or academics don't really know everything that goes on, and yeah, so that was an interesting book, but like I said, it's way too expensive for that. The next book I read was The Truth About Why People Do Bad Things by Tom Gash. I want to say it's probably my favorite non-fiction book I read in 2018. Is crime an immoral choice eliminated by tough punishment, or is poverty its main cause and social reform the remedy? Neither, says Tom Gash. Using the latest research, he demolishes the myths around crime, revealing that it's both far less rational and much easier to reduce than we thought. I just really liked how he tried to demolish these myths. I think this is such a good book if you're interested in crime, so you know why crime happens. I think this is a really good start. Okay, the next book, it's basically a letter, is Cypre by Khaled Hosseini, best-selling author of The Kite Runner. You probably know him. And this letter is illustrated very beautifully. I don't want to show too much. It's a letter from a father to his son. Cypre was inspired by the story of Alan Kurdi, the 3-year-old Syrian refugee who drowned in the Mediterranean Sea trying to reach safety in Europe in September 2015. You probably know the picture of this little boy lying on the beach. It's absolutely horrible. And so Khaled Hosseini published this letter. It's really sad, like I can't read it without crying. And also £1 from the sale of this book will go to UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. So if you buy this book, you also donate £1. So now we'll change the genre again to Fluent Forever by Gabriel Weiner. I'm not really sure. He has a method how to learn languages, and it's just different from what we taught in school or language classes. He recommends making flashcards with pictures and learning, not learning the translation, but learning what it's called if you see it, you know. Alright, the next book is The Psychopath Whisperer by Kent Keel, Inside the Minds of Those Without a Conscience. So this Dr. Keel did some research in prisons, and he researched these psychopaths, and he basically figured out that the brains of psychopaths are different from our brains. Some of the things he described that those psychopaths did or that happened to them is disgusting. So if you have a weak stomach, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's not a lot, so you can get through that, you know. But that's also really interesting. The next book I read was Carrie by Stephen King, my first Stephen King book, and I actually didn't really like it. I liked how it was written. It's not just like the first person narrative. There are also like newspaper articles to tell the story, interviews that tell the story. It's also from the point of view from other people as well. So I really like how it was written, but just reading it was a bit, the story makes more sense for a movie, and I know there are some movie adaptations. I haven't seen one yet. I need to do that. And I also don't like it when men write about periods. What do they know about menstruation? I mean, it's really not like blood's flowing out. Seriously, I will definitely read some of his other works, but this one was alright. I had to take off the scarf, it was getting too hot. Okay, the next book I read was an ebook, and it was I'll Eat When I'm Dead by Barbara Burland. It's like The Devil Wears Prada with a bit of murder in it. It was also a bit of a guilty pleasure, not serious literature. Yeah, it was a fun read, but nothing special. The next book I read was The Godfather by Mario Puzo. Absolutely one of my favorite books I read in 2018. It's so good. I watched the movies and I was really obsessed with them, so I was also obsessed with the book. I actually started to think like a mafia boss. I kid you not. I love that world. It's perfection. So the next book I read was The Best Advice I Ever Got by Katie Couric. In this book she collects the advice from some famous people who share the best advice they ever got or give their advice. I mean, it's a bit like a typical follow your dreams stuff, never give up, work hard, yada yada yada, but some of them were actually quite interesting to me. One of them is the advice that Kathryn Stockett gives, so the best-selling author of The Help. You probably read the book or saw the movie, and what I didn't know was that her book, when she tried to publish it, so I'm just gonna read that part, okay. In the end, I received 60 rejections for The Help. Letter number 61 was the one that accepted me. Can you imagine getting 60 rejections for your book? And I mean, some people would give up after 10. And she kept going. She just knew she wanted to publish that story, and that, I think, that is motivating. That really is. So I liked her advice. The next book I read was in German. It's called Dackelblick by Frauke Scheunemann, and Dackel means dachshund, and you probably know that I have 2 dachshunds, so I'm really obsessed with dachshunds, and this book was really cute. It's about this dachshund called Hercules, and he's friends with a cat, so he gets adopted, and his owner's boyfriend is a jerk, so he manages to break them up, which is really funny. Then his owner is very upset, and he decides that she needs a new boyfriend. So he and his cat friend try to find her the perfect boyfriend. So, you know, it's a sweet story, and yeah, so it's cute, it's cute. The next book I read is also in German. It's by a Swiss author, and it's called Gaddafis Rache aus dem Tagebuch einer Geisel from Max Goeldi. You probably have never heard about this if you're not from Switzerland. And the thing is, in 2008, one of Muammar Gaddafi's, you probably know him as the former president, dictator, I don't know what you want to call him, of Libya. And so one of his sons, he got arrested in Geneva, Switzerland, and because two of the people who work for him said that he abused them, so, you know, the police came and arrested him, and this was such a scandal for them. Like, his sister said that, you know, eye for an eye. And what happened was that this guy, Max Goeldi, he worked for a Swiss company. He was stationed in Libya, and, you know, everything was fine. Like, he had his working visa, yada yada yada. And then the, you know, police came, and they sort of used, like, I don't want to swear, but a bullshit excuse to arrest him and say that his documents were wrong. The company he worked for didn't have a proper visa and proper documents and whatever. So he spent like 10 days in a regular Libyan prison, and then he was kind of released, but he couldn't get out of the country. They had his passport. This also happened to another guy that worked for another Swiss company, and so they punished them because Muammar Gaddafi's son was arrested, but that son, like, nothing happened to him. He set bail, he left, you know, like, there was nothing but it's sort of the humiliation. This book also highlights the diplomatic relationship between Switzerland and Libya, and what, you know, like, the diplomats did, and how, like, stuff didn't work. They spent 53 days somewhere, they didn't even know where, like, were basically kidnapped, and then they got back to, you know, embassy, and in the end he got his sentence. I mean, he did nothing wrong. He was basically a hostage for 2 years. He couldn't leave the country for 2 years. Some of the time he had to spend in prison, but, you know, basically not being able to leave is sort of a prison. And the last book I read in 2018 was Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Yeah, it's also a classic, must read. It's about this guy Marlowe who tells the story of his journey up the Congo River and just what he experienced. There was this ivory trade, and he met this man, Mr. Kurt. So this is sort of a book about imperialism, about what Europeans did in Africa, how they treated the people there, which was obviously really horrible. And the book is also quite short, so I highly recommend reading it. Anyway, so these are all the books I read in 2018. I'm not really sure what I'm going to read this year. I, for a fact, know that I want to read The Count of Monte Cristo, just because I'm visiting Marseille in a few weeks, and a lot of the story is set there. So yeah, I want to read that, and, you know, some other classics, maybe some other non-fiction books about crime. You know, I mean, if you have recommendations, please leave them down below. I hope this also inspired you to read more. I think reading is such a good way to spend your time. Even if you read fiction, you learn so much, and yeah, so I'm a huge advocate for reading. I hope this was interesting. Thank you so much for watching. See you in my next video. Bye!